Now, Reform UK are holding a rally in South Yorkshire this evening, with the leader, Richard Tice, speaking to an audience there, and I'm delighted to be joined by him now. Richard, thank you for making the time for us. Today, you've unveiled a 6-point plan to tackle illegal immigration, to stop the boats. We can see it on our screens now, which include declaring a security threat, leaving the ECHR, and even a turn back the boats policy. Richard, what will declaring a national security threat actually do?
Good evening, Tom, and it's great to be here in the Chill Bar in Barnsley, where actually you'll be delighted to know that the vast majority of people, in a survey of hands I carried out earlier, all put their hands up and say they watch GB News, so that's great news. But also, Tom, on the issue you've just questioned, the national security threat, well, it's actually something that's required, and what Australia did when they turned back the boats, under the UN 51 Convention, you can actually declare a national security threat. And that's very important because the reality is that is the truth, that this is a threat to our national security. And we've got to leave the European Convention on Human Rights because we don't need a foreign overseas court to tell us what to do. But as Nigel talked about this morning, and I've talked about before, the truth is that the French have international obligations under the UN Convention of the Law at Sea 1982 to pick up and take back to France. The Belgians are doing it and the boats have stopped. And the French are failing in their duties. Instead, they're actually aiding and abetting criminality by bringing the boats to the halfway point where they hand them over to Border Force or the RNLI. And that's completely wrong. And this will only stop when you have proper leadership in the country that will do what we know works, and that's pick up and take back. And as Nigel said this morning, if the French Navy won't do it, then we need to use our own military, whether it's the Marines, Border Force.
Richard, does this not enter into the law of unintended consequences? Because the French don't operate in a vacuum. And if the French are mightily annoyed by the British returning migrants to them, however logical it might seem to you or I, the French would potentially declare trade sanctions on the United Kingdom. They could shut the Channel crossing. They could take our fish. The consequences to the UK economy could be severe.
They're in breach of international law, Tom. It is as simple as that, and it requires leadership to make it very clear and to have a very hard-nosed discussion with them and to say, you've got to carry out your obligations. If not, we're going to do it for you.
But Richard, I'm talking about realpolitik here.
Hang on,
I'm not sure a hard-nosed discussion
yes, and I'm talking about
will work against French nationalism.
Sorry, absolute nonsense. Sorry, Tom. What you've got to do is protect British interests, and you've got to stop the boats from crossing the 12-mile line. The whole point of a government is to protect our borders, defend our citizens. And as Nigel said, almost 4,000 boats have crossed, 125,000 people, and it's got to stop. And realpolitik is that actually if you do this, you're doing the French a favour. Joint processing centres in northern France, assess people, make a decision within a fortnight, give them a week to appeal,
on that point, Richard,
and then deport
you've
them
mentioned the
and
1951 Convention and, of course, offshore processing. Under the terms of the 51 Convention, it's a very generous convention. I'm surprised that you don't actually suggest leaving it, because one of the reasons the government has resisted offshore processing is that basically anyone coming from Afghanistan or Iran or many people coming from China even, many countries, many tens of millions of people, perhaps even hundreds of millions of people around the world have a theoretical right under the 51 Convention to come to the United Kingdom. Offshore processing would simply be a route for them to come here.
Absolutely nonsense, Tom. No, they're all breaking the law because they've come through a safe country. It is as simple as that, but the lefty lawyers won't have it, and the ECHR won't have it, which is why we've got to leave the ECHR. And an important part of declaring a national security threat is that actually that gives you additional abilities to do what's required to protect British citizens and to defend our borders. And that's the right thing. It's also, by the way, Tom, if we show leadership and a shining example here, then firstly, most importantly, we'll save lives, the 15 or so who've sadly died already this year. But it's what the EU leaders should do in the Mediterranean. Pick up and take back to North Africa, and then actually thousands of people in the Mediterranean will stop losing their lives. And I think there's a certain irony that we've actually got the kind and compassionate policy that will save lives. And it's the supposedly nice, fluffy, lefty lawyers and do-gooders, right? They're actually meaning that more people are dying, which means it's them that's got blood on their hands.
I think a lot of people will buy this unintended consequences argument you're making of the lefty lawyers, but I wonder if there is an unintended consequence argument economically for treating the French as the Australians were so ably to treat much smaller countries. Richard, I'm really sorry, we've run to the end of this segment. We'll have to have you back very soon, and I hope that we continue this conversation very soon indeed. Richard Tice there. Now, of course, I'm joined by my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the PR consultant and former Labour aide, Stella Santakidu. Stella, what did you make of what Reform had to say there about stopping the boats?
So I'm surprised that Richard Tice keeps on talking about international law and how these illegal migrants are breaking the law, when in fact the plan that he's suggesting would be breaking international law. So which one is it? Does the Reform Party care about international law and they want us to abide by it, or they don't care and they think that it is okay if in the eyes of the international community we're seen to do something illegal? Because that's what would be happening if we were turning around the boats. And I'm also very interested in what you said, Tom, about the economic implications, because in this general election the most important thing is the economy and the cost of living crisis. So how exactly is this policy going to help? I don't think it is. I think it's going to do the opposite.
It might create a sort of blockade with France. Kelvin, do you buy that?
Well, let's face the reality. We can't carry on like this, OK? What Richard says has a shy charm, because something would happen. And I accept the way your questioning was going. Well, would France basically view this as an act of war? Well, since there are 2 points to make there. One, he has already said it's a national security. We will be passing a law. And secondly, were we to end up in some kind of economic blockade with France, would that be a price which the people of our country would be prepared to pay if it meant that we didn't have to take in, honestly, tens of thousands of people into an economy right now which can't even service our own people.
And humiliatingly doing so as well, given that the Royal Navy used to rule the waves, and now we're sort of acting as a chauffeur service on the channel. It's very odd that we can't control that small out of land when we controlled all of the oceans.
On Twitter, there's a boat where a sailor is leaning across, looking at a boatload of migrants and say, "Would you like to become a Tory candidate?" Right? And that is so. You
mentioned the Tories, Kelvin, because one thing that we haven't mentioned at all in this discussion, and Richard Tice didn't mention it either, is Rwanda. Shall we have a listen to what the Prime Minister was saying on his trademark Rwanda policy earlier today?
We're the ones that have got a clear plan, and that's how we'll deliver a secure future. The particular topic of illegal migration is a case in point. We've got a bold plan, the Rwanda scheme, to ensure that if you come here illegally, you will not be able to stay and you'll be returned. That's how you create a deterrent. The penny is dropping across Europe that is the right approach.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier. Stella, you're shaking your head.
I'm not buying it. If he thought that the Rwanda plan was going to work, he was going to wait to call the election until the autumn. He knows it's not going to work. He knows that the summer is going to be a mayhem. He knows it will look bad.
What if one of the big obstacles to all of this is in fact the House of Lords? The House of Lords can block anything that the Commons passes that wasn't in a manifesto. Rwanda wasn't in the last manifesto. Perhaps a general election can unstick that constitutional problem.
Not really. In the end, the House of Lords will allow policy to go by. They've had very, very good and serious concerns about the bill, which of course the Labour Party supports. Which they watered down, and they had good reasons, because you know what? The UK is a democratic country. You have very good...
The House of Lords isn't democratic.
But it is part of your democratic institutions. It has a very good role to play.
The House of Lords is the very opposite of democracy.
It is as a legislative chamber, it has a role to play. I agree that it needs
a constitutional role to play, but not a democratic one.
It is part of your institutions.
Stella and Kelvin, you'll be back a little bit later in the programme, but thank you very much to both of you